and welcome to the world of Hawthorn Handmade. I'm Stephanie Carswell and I'm the owner and designer of Hawthorn Handmade needle felting kits. In this series of videos I'm going to be teaching you the basics of how to needle felt, from the tools and materials you will need to get started through to making basic shapes and animals. Each video is nice and short and focused, so you'll be able to learn in bite-sized chunks how to create your very own woolly masterpiece. So today we're going to be talking about the materials and tools you need to get started with needle felting. To get started you really only need a few basic things. You need some form of working surface. What I prefer to use is a block of foam. This is a really sturdy block of foam, there's not much give to it, it's actually upholstery foam. And what it does is acts as a working surface to work on. It protects the table or your lap from the needles and it stops the needles breaking, and you can also use it to help shape pieces. It's mainly there as a working surface. We're not felting into the foam, we're just using it to kind of cushion the needles. So that's what you need on the bottom. You can also use what's called a needle felting brush, which is something like this. It's just a solid wooden base with a really stiff brush top. This is good for needle punching, so that's where you're putting a piece of fabric down and stabbing through the fabric with the wool and attaching the wool to the fabric, or for creating flat pieces, but it's not so good for sculptural needle felting, which is what I focus on, so I don't tend to use one of these. But you can use it if you've got one already. It's good to get started, but I would recommend getting a block of foam, and foam's pretty cheap. They're a couple of pounds to get this is a 7-inch block, which is quite a good size to work on. You can use something like a household sponge or a car wash sponge, but it will start to break up pretty quickly, so it's worth investing in something a bit sturdier to get you started. The second main thing you need is your needle felting needles. So the felting needle is made out of steel and it's got a long handle with a thinner bit at the far end, and just on the end, you can't see it on the video obviously, but if you have a look when you've got yours, there's tiny little barbs that catch backwards. And what happens when you stab that needle through some wool, the barbs catch on what is the scales on the fibre, and they push the scales together and they start to hold on to one another, and because the barbs only go one way, the needle comes out clean and leaves the fibres where they are. So the more and more you stab, the more and more the fibres hold on to one another and they start to form a solid shape, and that is needle felting. Needles come in various different sizes and gauges. The size is related to the shape on the end, so you get triangles, which are 3 sides, or you get cross stars, which have got 4 sides, or you can get spiral needles where the barbs spiral around the edge, which are really great for doing fine work. Most of the time I use a star needle. This is a 38 gauge star. The 38 just refers to the thickness of the needle at the end, and 38 is really good all-rounder. The higher the number, the finer the needle, so you can get a 40 or even a 42 gauge needle, and that's very fine, and they can snap quite easily. Or you can get something like a 36, and that's a thicker needle. It's great for working with coarser wools or getting bulk work done really quickly. So I tend to work with 1 needle on its own, but you can get needle holders, which this holds 6 needles. I've got one here that holds 3. Or if you struggle just to hold the single needle on its own, you can get a needle holder that holds 1 needle. So that's quite useful if you've perhaps got a little bit of arthritis in your hand, or you're doing a lot of needle felting and holding the single needle can get a bit tiring over the time. So that's really helpful. But as I say, I tend to work with just the single needle on its own. The next main thing you need for needle felting is of course the wool. In Britain, most of the wool that we get comes in what's known as roving or tops. In Britain it's called tops, I think in the US it's roving. This is where the wool has been cleaned and carded and then it's been combed out, so it's all in one long length and all the fibres are going in the same direction. I use this, I'm used to using this because this is what I started with. You can also get wool in batting, or bats, and that's where the wool has been put through a carding machine and all the fibres are going in different directions and mixed up, and it kind of comes like this in a sheet. Hopefully you can see that on there. It makes it a bit quicker to needle felt with because some of the work has been done for you already, some of the fibres have already been mixed up. So that's quite good to get started with. It's harder to get in the UK than in the US, but it is good if you can get hold of it. So these are all cleaned and nicely prepared wools. You can of course process your own wools, or you can get wool in different stages of being processed. This is called locks, this is Wensleydale locks, and what's happened here is they hasn't actually been carded or brushed out, so it's been cleaned, but I've still got kind of nice curly bits and lumps and bumps, and it's really good for adding texture to the surface of pieces. In terms of the actual wools you can get, there's obviously lots of breeds of sheep, and some of them felt better than others. A lot of wool you'll find is merino, which generally comes from Australia or South Africa. It's very fine wool, and it's great for wet felting. It's not so good for needle felting. Needle felting, you need a bit more bulk to your wool, a bit more oomph with it, and a bit more crimp. If you pull out a fibre, or just open out the wools, you'll see a lot of the fibres have got a zigzaggy crimp to them, and the more that is, the easier it will be to needle felt. So that's quite a good tip to look for if you're looking for wool, if it's got a bit more bulk to it. So I've got various ones here. I've got Jacob, Swaledale, this is blue-faced Leicester. I think this is a blue-faced Leicester as well. And then I've got some dyed Shetland. So you can get lots of different colours in wools that aren't merino, but merino, if you want lots of bright colours, is about the only one you can get. But try and use something a bit more bulky. Really good way to go if you want to make animals is to use something that's got a bit more bulk for the inside of the piece, and then you can put merino, nice bright colours on the outside, almost like a skin. That's quite a good way to do it. So those are the wools. Next main things that you'll need really is just extras. So you can needle felt with you've got your foam block, your needles and your wool. You can start with just that, so it's really nice and cheap. You really don't need a lot more than that. You can go a bit further and get a few extra bits and pieces. A pair of scissors is really helpful. So here I've just got a little pair of embroidery scissors, which are good and useful. I'll explain a bit more about them in a second. And what I've also got here is a pair of dog clipping scissors. When you're splitting the wool to felt with, you don't cut it, you pull it apart. So wool will just split and pull gently apart, or pull this way, separate like that. You don't want to cut it. If you cut it, you're losing its ability to felt because you're cutting the fibre and it doesn't have that kind of nice length that all the fibres then start to hold on to one another. You break its ability to do that. But what you can use scissors for is when you've finished a piece, just giving it a nice trim if you've got any fluffy bits sticking out. And that's where the dog trimming scissors are really helpful, because they've got a nice little curve, so you can kind of trim around pieces really easily. Really useful little things to have in your toolbox. The embroidery scissors are a couple of pounds, $5, something like that. These are a little bit more, but they're really, really useful. A few other bits that are really nice to have in your needle felting toolbox. There's a couple of pipe cleaners. These are great for kind of making things like chicken legs, or generally legs and basic armatures. You can make a leg around a pipe cleaner really easily if you just want a nice quick way to do it. You can cut them and use them just as themselves without wool on them, but they're really useful to have. Going with the pipe cleaners, always useful to have a pair of pliers, which these ones are great because they've also got the cutter on them as well. So just something useful like that. You've probably got something like that already. Needle and thread, really useful to have. You might want to make something that's hanging, so you can sew a little bit of ribbon onto the top of it and hang it from, say, your Christmas tree or from a window or a door handle or something similar like that. So just useful to have some of those to hand. If you want to get a bit more advanced, there's a few other tools you can get. If you want to start mixing your own wools and mixing colours up, so say I wanted to do a blend of the nice white and brown here, you can use what are called carding brushes to mix the wools up. I don't actually own a pair of carding brushes, they're quite expensive. What I own are dog brushes, more dog tools. It's wonderful. My dog's sat down here somewhere, so he's probably run away because he doesn't want to have a brush. But these are just basic dog brushes, and you can lay the wool onto them and you use them in the same way as you'd use carding brushes, and you can blend the wool. I'll be doing videos that goes into this a bit more detail later on, but just quite good one to have. Don't go and buy expensive carding brushes. These do the job perfectly well for small stuff. If you want to be carding and mixing and blending lots of wool, you want to be looking at something more like a drum carder, but that's perhaps another level. Another final tool that I've got here that I use occasionally, and it is a bit of an investment, so you've really got to love needle felting to get this, is an Addy Quick. And what this is a electronic needle felting machine. It's got a needle in the end here, and once it's plugged in, you can turn it on, and the needle comes in and out, stabs in and out, something like 1200 revs per minute or something crazy like that. It's very quick, so you can felt pretty quickly with it. I find it quite difficult to work with in terms of doing a lot of work or bulk work. I much prefer the dexterity that just doing it by hand gives you. But it can be quite useful if you're doing a large piece to do a whole surface and just go over the whole thing. It can save quite a bit of time on that. Or if you're doing kind of indentation work, so creating lumps and bumps, it can be quite good for that kind of thing. So that's really is an advanced tool further down the line than if you're just beginning. So those are all the basics that you need. So as I say, just to get started, all you need is a foam block, a couple of needles. You don't need lots of different sizes of needles, you just need one or two just to get you started, and some really nice wool, and then you can get going with your needle felting. Thank you for watching Hawthorn Handmade videos. I do hope you've learnt something from today's video, but if you have any further questions or want to check out more about our needle felting kits and supplies, please do take a look at our website, or you can drop me an email on the details on screen. Let the felting begin!